1980s, a major dispute arose between the Argentine and United Kingdom governments in the South Atlantic Islands region, known to the British as the Falkland Islands. This resulted in a short war, which the British won. After 30 years, we are now able to establish that a secret non-human, or ET, connection exists, and the existence of a special, intelligent and aware so-called oil, which has been portrayed in the X-Files and Prometheus films. Something so overwhelming and terrifying that it is believed was the cause of the many murders and deaths of scientists and computer programmers at the Marconi Communications Company in Britain. David Griffin from Exopolitics UK gave an initial presentation of this at the July 2012 conference in Liverpool. The Amash project now provides this presentation with extra information and analysis, leading to a possible connection with a similar etheric intelligent black oil which infests communications and communication systems.
Okay, this is Basis 17, and we are joined with the Amash project, Exopolitics UK, England, Scotland, someplace up north, and we were going to be joined by Richard D. Hall to give our current guest an absolute grilling, because tonight's subject is so important we needed to really haul his ass over the coals. So unfortunately we're going to have to sit in, I'm going to have to adopt that role, and we're going to see what's really going on, and this is about Falklands and ET elements to the 1982 Falklands War.
And we're here with David Griffin from Exopolitics.
Yeah. Thank you for having me to join the Amash list, the growing list of Amash interviewees. Interesting, actually, Miles, you mentioned Richard Hall, because apparently on one of his shows, when he was doing a preview to the Liverpool Exopolitics event, when the title was read out that I was covering the ET element to the Falklands, obviously because not many people have heard that there's an ET element to the Falklands, so it all sounds a little bit comical at the start, and he claimed that I'd got the whole thing from one of Timothy Good's books, which I then went and found on my friend's book cabinet, and there's all of a quarter of a paragraph that Timothy Good found out about the Falklands War. So none of this is on the internet, and it's all pretty original.
Can I just say, this is the result of also 2 years' work, David, isn't it, as well?
Two years' work, and yes, and I'm indebted also to a contactee called Alec Newald, who's New Zealand, who I've basically been in communication with and has been most helpful with this. So the one point I wanted to make, although it's based on a contact story, because of course people often give you flack for that sort of thing, it's just, oh, it's a ET contact account, but I hope what people will see by the time they finish watching this video, and you can ask whatever questions you want, that you'll see that there's a sort of mosaic of other inputs and bits of data, just like this, the deaths of the Marconi people, which is again many people on the internet will have heard of, but very few people have actually made any links regarding what actually went on there with the Marconi deaths in Britain. And so basically, I have put together a couple of years' worth of research, and I hope that it's got somewhere, and it's still ongoing at the moment. So I'll just flick through and try and give you an overview of what it's about. So we've got, you have to bear with us because we've got set up in Miles's very nice home studio here, a rather rudimentary, as you can see, rudimentary system of some of the files and images I used previously. So I was going to add in, it's a very short clip from the X-Files movie, which, interestingly enough, I had a vague idea what it was about as I came to the end of writing the presentation that I did at Liverpool. But interestingly, the whole film, when I watched it back again, was very much so uncannily close to a lot of the stuff I found out. So we know that fiction imitates fact, and art and all that, vice versa. So I'll click this and we'll hopefully watch this and just see what you think.
Wow, well that's pretty stunning.
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting about that is, of course, the main if you watch the film, the main proponents, the Illuminati guy, is actually British, and he's the one that actually breaks ranks with the Illuminati. If you go back and watch the film, they have this crisis meeting because this certain substance has been found, this virus, and it's the British guy in his British house that decides to go and find Mulder and basically give him this antivirus for this thing. But if you rewatch that clip, or the whole movie, there's a lot more. Just that clip itself gives you a lot more, tells you a lot more about what's actually going on, and pans out into geopolitical events that I found were going on with this actual issue itself.
Now, the thing I'm very interested about this is that this black fluidic energy, that there is a black fluidic intelligent nanovirus.
They're mentioning that sort of thing, and it very much mirrors what is found out here, which we're going to come to. But yes, it's a black oil-like substance, which puts a whole new meaning on this whole idea that we're hunting for oil, particularly, and you'll probably know more about this.
Oil itself.
Well, oil itself is this metaphor. It's very, and it's really hit me.
The mechanism which we release oil is using smokeless fire, which is the definition of releasing the gin into our reality.
Right. Well, when you've heard this, you can perhaps talk a bit more about that.
The point is that in the early days, I mean, there's a picture of Energy 106 behind you in the background there, or there was. The point about this is that this black fluidic substance has been seen, and it's been seen at Harwell, and the person who saw it described it as an intelligent substance, and he quoted, his phrase was, "We have lost control of ourselves."
Was that Barry King, just as a side note?
No, it's not Barry King.
Okay, in that case I'll take it as that's
a totally independent person again that by others has been identified as a robotoid clone of the worst kind.
Right, so he saw, and it was definitely...
He was a patent attorney at Harwell. His job was to be there when they discovered something. As a technical exercise, they had somebody there who could technically patent things if necessary, or advise on the basis of patenting. Right. And that's what his basic little territory was at Harwell. Okay,
and this was an oil, nothing that...
He saw
it wasn't
black fluidic life forms crawling along the earth and going down into the cable ducting.
That's everyone listening, that sounds completely sci-fi, but
it's not sci-fi.
Well, I'm just trying to. Yeah, well, no, in Harwell, I know the bit of history a little bit about what Harwell deals with. Interestingly, because you mentioned he was in the patent office, I've got a quote here which I'll read out later about when
his company had an office there.
Okay, yeah, but when this first turned up at Marconi, as we'll find out in a little while, then they did this South African intelligence guy did lots of checks, and they all talked about how at the time there was no patents, they couldn't find any fellow military companies that had anything like this, but this was the very mid-80s, so when the period that your friend witnessed that, I would be highly interested in what year that was, because that would then, if that was later on, at the late 80s, that would make a lot more sense.
The 2000s.
Right, okay, could even be around then, because apparently the British, according to the South African intelligence agency, down in the Falklands, he claims that the British struck gold, and this whole, again, metaphors, oil, gold, black gold, starts to get quite crazy. Again, we got that headline that I remember, and
so this is from the Sun.
This is from the Sun at the time. And so I just made the point that underneath this war it looked like something else was perhaps going on, and the fact that if many people said this, why on earth did we send all these fleets down for these tiny little islands, given what we said about oil?
It did seem extraordinary.
Yeah, oil's really hard to extract from down there, the oil rights and things like that. But we know lots of things have been going off down in the Antarctica. There's the Nazis have been down there. We'll cover a bit of that in a minute.
Can I just read out that little bit, David, in case people have difficulty with that, just to understand it? Behind the media hype that boosted Thatcher's poll ratings lay a hidden agenda that has not been publicly linked to the war before, and the ET aspect of the scenario are both central, but sufficient evidence exists to make a strong case without it.
Yeah, and that's the point I wanted to sort of say, that because we get a lot of flack in this scene for contact, things that are just based on what ETs have said and things, and there's I'm not denigrating that at all. We're big believer in all that stuff, but it's still making the point that if you can put this mosaic together and have other elements around it from politics or from whichever field, then it means that you're building a case, and it makes the whole ET issue far more important. And obviously also says how central, which I hope you'll find by the end of this sort of talk, how central the ET issue is to all these political events that we just see the surface of.
Well, also, if you think about the technology issue, it puts a whole different spin on the concept of keeping oil and gas and coal going.
Yeah.
In the light of electromagnetic technology, or versus that.
Yeah,
so.
And there's another element to this, which probably haven't got time to go into, about a free energy device that came from a ship linked to this ET group that was shot down and then went onto the international market and was bought by Saudi Arabia. But that
I don't know. I think we need to get that in.
Well, that's that's long. The other point, I also made the point. I was at this talk and just saying that in our lives we all have these episodes where we perhaps meet certain people, we come across certain situations which sort of ring true with us. We may not pay much attention at that moment, but then later on in our lives you think, why do we think about that sort of thing? Why did we meet that person? Why did that person say that sort of thing? And when I was at university in Bradford, I'd just been to see Pink Floyd The Wall on huge IMAX in Bradford, and we went to a curry house with one of my friends, and sitting having a curry, there was a guy opposite with his partner, and I think whatever we were talking about, I can't remember, a long time ago, we must have been discussing something, and he butted in and he said, if you want to know something about the Falklands, there was a lot more going on in the Falklands than you realise. And he pointed like this and he said things going on. And of course, not having had a huge interest in this field at that point, we just left it. But that was one of those things that it stuck in my head. I was like,
and when he was doing that gesture,
yeah.
did you think that indicated some kind of aerial activity of a
I am pretty sure that's what he meant, because he also looked a little bit like, I don't want to say much more, and also a little bit disconcerted about having said it. So that was just one of those instances. But as we'll see, he most probably was correct, because we've since found a couple of documents that say that. So again, as part of this building up evidence, because I didn't want to just come out and say, yes, I found this ET issue to the Falklands, then started advertising on military sites, both in Britain and Argentina. Also got in touch with Exopolitics Argentina, who weren't very helpful. I think there's obviously still, as you pointed out before we started filming, then this year's the current 30th anniversary of the Falklands War, and of course Britain in its usual way wants to wave its flag, and we send, what did we do to mark that? We didn't go and do it quietly. We send Prince William down to which creates huge headlines, and that annoys the Argentinians have currently got a new government in, and as part of this they're getting quite gung-ho about the Falklands again. So just at the time when it was all ramping up, with the Argentina, who are in economic crisis, the whole thing too is what they call the Malvinas is hyping up again. They're going, we want these islands back, and it's, oh no, we don't want a repeat of that. And what do? We send Prince William down as if to territorially stake our claim, get our big penis down there in the form of Prince William. Not that Prince William's a big penis, but so as part of this I was trying to gather evidence, and one Argentinian researcher sent me, and Joanne can actually pronounce the name of this person, because I can't, because she's very good at Spanish. So the very famous contactee that I must just say had his case validated by J. Allen Hynek, and spoke at Argentinian's main UFO event, and also got flown with Argentinian security, interestingly enough, got flown to do a talk in, I presume it must have been Lachlan, I don't know where, but a big US-based one. So this is
Ricardo Jesus Velázquez.
Perfect. Okay. Essentially, in the run-up, the year before the Falklands War, so we're talking, 81-ish, he was basically picked up by a UFO, had no prior experiences with UFOs or ETs, was picked up by UFO, ETs landed, they took him to a base in the Andes, a very high-tech base. He said the rock opened up, in they went, huge screens everywhere. He claimed there were numerous ETs watching world events, including one, if I remember, of New York, one of something else, somewhere else, some other forest somewhere, and obviously monitoring the planet, as we often hear in contactee accounts they're doing.
Did he say what they looked like? This is a matter of interest.
Do you know, I'll have to go back and recheck that, or you can go and if you have a look on Google, you'll find it. His account was quite hard to track down, but it's there. If you, I can't remember what these ETs actually appeared like. Very, very friendly, but gave him the usual stories that we, of course, hear from ETs about. You know, well, once there was a civilization called Atlantis, then we had a pole shift, and we're damaging the Earth. The usual stuff, you know, 10 a penny that we hear from contact cases. What was most interesting, given the timing of when they picked him up, I mean, this is his second contact, so we got here February 1982. So again, better remind people, the Falklands War started officially in April 1982 and ended in June 1982. So 3 months before, you can read there, I've highlighted in yellow, they took him to the same underground base. They had a look at these big 3D viewing screens which they showed him something on before. This time he thought it was something like the South Pole, could see the ice flows and could see battles taking place. He then came to a point where he realised that it was a war in the Falkland Islands, so he must have realised from somehow recognised some sort of landmark.
I think here when it says I was taught, I think it was I was shown.
Shown, yeah. Again, this is my. I had to translate this using Google online translation because it wasn't in English from a Argentinian website. So yeah, then saw warplanes, battles, prisoners being taken, etc. But interestingly, what the ETs explained to him then was that Britain was going to win the Falklands War, Argentina was going to lose. But the point that really struck me, having done the bits of research that I've done, was they said this was it was a political topic, but it was far more to do with business than it was to do with war.
So then you have to ask what that business is.
Well, exactly, given that we were shown this gun-ho flag-waving proper war scenario, that's what we were told about. It's like, let's go and save these islanders and get our territory back. Well, that's a war thing. So another quick point, that basically he then told this story to an Argentinian UFO researcher, and the military intelligence found out about him, and up until the start of the Gulf War, so from January to April 82, he was then repeatedly imprisoned and tortured for having said this. That they obviously thought he was a spy, or they knew he'd met these ETs. I don't quite know.
That's just horrendous, isn't it? I mean, that.
Well, it is when you're there telling just the truth. Someone that isn't experienced in this situation of having met ETs, and then is just telling his truth to what he thinks is a UFO research. I just think these people are scum that go and hand these things over to confidentially, and then go and hand them over to military. I don't know why on earth they go and do something.
Well, I guess they think they're doing something positive to help. Yeah. To forewarn, to give some intelligence.
Wasn't too positive in his case, though.
No, it certainly wasn't.
But you mentioned, we discussed information about sightings down there and things like that. Well, interestingly enough, in the we've had these endless release, which of course Nick Pope and the great David Clarke.
We're talking about the Ministry of Defence.
Ministry of Defence files, that get released. I think we're on our penultimate. This is the 9th release, I think, at the moment. That came out in July. And interestingly enough, someone alerted me to this because, of course, they take a long time going. Some of them are very boring. They take a long time to go through. But interestingly, I don't think you'll read this bottom bit. But essentially, this is from some military body that I couldn't quite trace from the letters above there. This is a poor copy image that we've had to take from PowerPoint here. But essentially, it says, when I link through and read it, it says, the last paragraph, this is from some high-up soldier or parliamentarian of some sort, someone in military intelligence. I'm sure that I'm not the only person to note the sharp fall in the number of UFO reports received since the beginning of the Falklands dispute. I have received a letter, I think, claiming that large numbers of UFOs have been seen in the vicinity of the task force. And then there's a little military joke at the end, presumably by little green men in ponchos. So that was a joke by the usual military humour at the end, but basically suggesting that of course someone from on board a ship, a captain, had sent forth this communique saying, look, we're having lots of lights as the task force is in the area. Right. So again, along with
was that noted? Just as like we had the Foo Fighters in World War II. Was there any? Did we have any main reports of sightings? Yeah.
Well, all I'm linking it to is my guy in the curry house was saying stuff going on, and then of course we have then an official MOD file also.
Yeah, but that's being let through. I mean, to have any reference to aliens on an official document must be a whistleblower. It must be code. I mean, if you're not able to say things, you say it in one way. That has been let through. That's absolutely a major whistleblower.
Well, it's not major because it's pretty boring, isn't it?
No, it's a point which refers to aliens. Why should that even be referenced? That's every line in these documents is agreed and okayed in meetings. For that kind of a sarcastic little green men flippant remark to be pushed through and released is a major whistleblow. If you look at code, if you look at the way Nick Pope describes anything, he goes through the greatest pains to say nothing by constantly counteracting what he's just said.
He's got a great art in doing that.
Yes, that's the precise art. The art is to score zero in a score in a game where you have pluses and minuses. For that to be in that document is a major pointer to aliens.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting point, and I think backs up the contactee and the Curry House guy. There was I won't go into it. There's also another guy who basically on the side of Argentina where they had a military base. This is at the start of the war. Claimed a huge UFO came over. Excuse me, and all these Argentinian troops went out, saw this huge, great UFO, huge apparently lights, and in his report, a army jeep got moved 3 miles from one and got plonked in another field, and this was a report that went through to the main Argentinian UFO Society. So,
and when was that exactly, David?
That was that would have been probably at the start of the war, so April '82. Yeah, so that was actually when war was going off. So again, so all these surrounding areas showing that area is pretty active.
Yeah, so I got 5th of April as the start of the war.
Right. So yeah, I knew it's April. Sometimes I mean, it all depends what you take. This, as we'll see, it depends what you take as the start of the war. We have the official. As Miles mentioned earlier, we have the South Georgia so-called invasion that was a bit of a strange false flag in its own way, because actually no troops were involved, but the British used that as their starting point.
I think that was also used as a means of showing that the intelligence agencies had failed miserably, and what a scandal they did not pick up on this, and lots of puffing and blowing.
There was lots of puffing and blowing in Parliament, which Joanne mentioned, with Lord Carrington, who, as we'll see in a minute, was standing up and constantly saying we need to do a lot more about these bloody arges and start getting a task force down there faster. Now, we think he knew a little bit, having looked at this area, think he knew a little bit more, and as we're aware in Britain, and as I was speaking to Grant Cameron actually at the end of the last conference, he was saying things like he thinks there's probably 3 or 4 people at top rank that know about this stuff and issue the orders down. And I agree with him. I don't think there's many more people on that. And of course, we know from the likes of Desmond Leslie and all the people that were linked to him, and Prince Philip has this interest that these lords, these aristocrats, have had a long-standing interest in this UFO issue.
Like Mountbatten as well.
Mountbatten and of course they can then influence the military and politicians, and so I think what Grant Cameron was saying, that maybe only three or four people.
I think just crucially, the reason why this is, we've interviewed in the MASH project John Shelton.
Yes.
Now the crucial reason why those royal types have an interest in ETs is because they actually have the ability to, or it is claimed, to manifest ETs, to actually physically call them in and bring them here, because they deal with them. So this idea that there's no connection there seems to be completely invalid.
But yeah, I think.
But anyway,
Can I just ask you about Grant Cameron? He's a Canadian guy, and I've just forgotten the name of his website. Fantastic job he does.
President something or other.
He runs Presidential UFO, and you forget he's got like 30 years of knowledge on this area, and just can talk on the whole history of this.
We had a fascinating time, me and Joanne, when we were at the Irish UFO conference.
2009, wasn't
2009, and he did a fantastic presentation.
He does, yeah. The man's a mine of information.
And he was not allowed in the United States, I think, to present.
Because he apparently, they stopped him because he apparently admitted he was being paid an honorarium, which I think just means you're getting paid your costs. And they said no, you're getting paid, and he couldn't get in. He had to deliver his talk by video phone or something. Yeah, I thought so. That was their excuse. Anyway.
He really is a fantastic researcher, and he's provided a lot of pushing the envelope kind of information.
Certainly.
from you know what happens at the top, certainly from the American and perhaps the Canadian and other.
Yeah, well, of course, you know, he's if you've got 30, 40 years knowledge, then you've got this, you know. Then I believe when he said that probably three people control the ET UFO issue in this area, then in Britain, he was saying, then you know, it wouldn't surprise me. And we're not talking, you know, we're talking who had the real picture. Then that makes sense. And again, the X-File clip makes it look like that. If you watch the X-Files clip at the start, we have a meeting, a British household with these people from different parts of the world, headed by this one British aristocrat. So, you know, this sort of stuff ties in and loops around.
Yeah, indeed.
Basically, I mean, there were some issues that I wanted to just basically point out very, very quickly, that we've had a long history down there. If you go to that wonderful place, that font of knowledge, Wikipedia, then you'll find out. If you go and look up, for instance, you type in Russia's interest in the South Atlantic or in Antarctica, you'll find literally from the 1900s onwards, Russia is listed as expedition, mineral expedition, research this expedition, and it fills pages. They were out there, and it accelerated. You'll get the same, of course, for the US, also going down there. So something is going on there beyond what I could assume was just for looking at penguins, taking pictures of polar bears, and looking at the odd bit of mineral. You know, what you then also notice, as you find with Admiral Byrd's mission in 1947, you find that in the post-war period, I know we had all the Nazi stuff that was going on, something accelerated. In the Cold War period, something accelerated to the point that now every major nation has a full-time base down there, and they're getting more towards the centre of the Antarctic. So something's going on around there that's a bit more beyond, and I think it links into this substance that we've just discussed with Miles, because there seems to be a certain area, Lake Vostok, that they're very interested in, that they seem to be have an awful lot of interest in, and are doing this deep sea drilling that we'll come to later. So also mention that, of course, the British, very few people know, the British sent a military operation in. It's called Operation Tarabin. They were the science brigade that they sent with them, but they actually sent commandos in to go and grab part of Antarctica. This was in response to Germany, who of course went and put flags and found New Schwabenland, and Argentina had done the same on Deception Island, which is just at the north side of Antarctica. Again, all this, you've got to remember your geography, which you'll see in a minute. All this is very close to the South Atlantic, where the Falkland Islands are, and the islands that we're going to discuss, the South Sandwich Islands, are even closer to the Antarctic. Hugely cruel conditions. This is why the whole argument with oil falls down, because apparently getting oil from down there is just so prohibitive, because the conditions for getting oil out of the seas are rough.
Really
supplying a base, keeping staff down there. So this is the boring historical side of things. So we're going to get to it. I just had to give a bit of background, because I can't just come in with this straight stuff that I'm going to.
Well, no, it's important. And also, I hadn't realised that since 1943, this Operation Tabarin, which was a military undertaking, had been going. I mean, I really, you know.
Yeah.
Again, these are areas that they don't come into your awareness, and they're certainly not taught. So, you know, the only way to find this out is people like you doing this fantastic research and bringing it to our attention. And because it's really important, it has a huge impact on how society develops in just about every way.
Well, it does when you ask why at the end, you know, towards the end of the Second World War, when we were exhausted from all this other stuff, were we then so having these arguments over this piece of ice, you know, this huge piece of ice down there, that something was going on. And again, as I then mentioned, we've got the other slide here with, you know, a lot of this could be put down to the Nazis. We've got, you know, this amazing quote from Karl Dönitz, who was in charge of the submarine fleet. Can you read that out from there? The green bit, that was his quote.
Germany's submarine fleet is proud that it created an unassailable fortress for the Führer on the other end of the world.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's, you know, some people have put that down. Well, what, you know, the Nazis were looking for something, and they left something there. And interestingly, it's just being released. There's a whole map now that's been released that the Russian Smersh, which I think is their intelligence arm of the Soviets, have released this map showing how a submarine can get through Antarctica and come up in this land. And it was amazing. It's come up in the land of Agartha. Yeah. Okay. And these instructions were amazing, and showed how they could go under this base. Anyway, so that's one reason. Now now we get onto the region, and this is where it starts getting interesting and important. So for geography, because a lot of people probably get a bit stuck with whereabouts we're talking about. So of course Argentina, you can see with the big land strip there, and Chile, etc., is all down there. If on the inset of the image, you can see there the Falkland Islands at the top, and these little strip that are bending around this sort of backwards C shape there. The very bottom one of those is an island called Southern Thule, which is spelled Thule, but I think in German is pronounced Thule.
Thule. Does that have anything to do with the Thule party that Hitler was so fond?
Yeah, because weren't they the party
that was linked to the esoteric,
the vril energies.
Metaphysical.
Well, you've got to ask yourself, because also that's called Southern Thule, and I got confused. I call it Thule because that's the easiest way to pronounce it for me. But in the Arctic, the Americans have a base that's called Thule in the Arctic as well. So we have a big Thule base in the Arctic, and we have a Southern Thule, which is, as we see, is.
And just to put it into perspective. There's the UK way up there, the little white bit, and there is the islands down there. So that's about 8,000 miles, is it?
8,000 miles to the Falklands, and what we did at the start, the Americans gave us use of Sentient Island, which is, I think, somewhere there, halfway in the midpoint. The Americans gave us use of Sentient Island, which is essentially just one big volcanic landing strip, and we did this amazing Vulcan bomber trip of refueling and went and bombed the runways of the Falklands. That was our first move of the war as we sent the task fleet down there. So we went to try and stop them having a landing zone, and that was the first real part of the war that went on. So that was just to give an idea, but it's this final island at the bottom of the chain that creates all the interest. So that was a quick history of the Falklands. What's the interesting point to make out is when you look at the arguments that have gone on. There's been the usual stuff between the powers like Spain and France and Portugal all over this area. It all goes very quiet, and then in the 1960s, the UN start discussing rights between Argentina and Britain for these islands. So it goes to UN level in the 1960s. And as we'll see, in the 1970s, we get this thing that actually kicks off this whole debate, which is the base being built on the Thule Island that we'll see there. Basically, war finishes 1982, Argentinian surrender. Diplomatic relations resume in 1990. So that's the potted history of the war. You can read that if you want to, because I went through this before. This just to make a point about how big on a level that we didn't even see. If the level we're going to be talking about is even below this, then what came out after the war was in a book written by President Mitterrand's psychoanalyst, who apparently used to go and see regularly, and he gave a quote in his book.
Excuse me, Mitterrand begins, apologising for his late arrival. I had a difference of opinion to settle with the Iron Lady. What an impossible woman, that Thatcher. With her 4 nuclear submarines on mission in the southern Atlantic, she threatens to launch the atomic weapon against Argentina, unless I supply her with the secret codes that render deaf and blind the missiles we have sold to the Argentinians. Margaret has given me very precise instructions on the telephone, and that's taken from a book on President Mitterrand by his psychoanalyst.
Yeah, and the point was there, of course, that rather ironically, the French had sold the Exocet missiles that actually ended up sinking or certainly damaging HMS Sheffield in the Falklands War, and of course they have these secret shut-off codes that you can stop them working, and Thatcher wanted those. So it's essentially the Falklands War nearly went nuclear, apparently, according to the threat. So that, again, something we don't see.
Who knows about that?
No one knows. I know that I found that in an obscure book that obviously, unless you've read President Mitterrand's analysis, his psychoanalysis book, then you don't hear about that sort of thing. So I thought that just illustrated a bit about how far the actual thing went. In that time, that for her to make that sort of statement carried a lot more weight than maybe it would now. If you threatened to launch nukes in the 80s, and that carried a lot more weight.
The only delivery system they've got to have would be the 4 submarines and the Vulcans.
Yeah, and I don't think the Falklands were equipped to do very much from, if you watch the documentary on that. That's the
anyway, four nuclear submarines is plenty enough.
Yeah, but I actually...
what were they going to fire nuclear weapons at?
Well, they were lined up along the coast of Argentina, but
blowing up Argentinian cities, that's what the hell are they doing that for?
Well, because
sorry, we need to explain this in the second
okay,
section of this. Which
that was for Mitterrand's conscience, wasn't it? On his conscience, it would have been the fact he didn't give the codes over.
And bearing in mind, we are now expecting the French in the present defence review to bail us out and we'll use their aircraft carriers while ours are not having anything on them. Anyway, we do need to close up on this second part. We'll take the first part, so we need a quick break.
All right.
And a recalibration of our thoughts, and back after the second.
Yeah, so we'll come back to this slide, which is the war began and ended.
I was going to say, I think the Falklands went nuclear in a slightly different way than we would have thought, or may have gone nuclear.
But the Germans simply took over They simply took over Queen Maud Land. They simply took over the Norwegian territory.
They flew over and dropped flags everywhere. But it seems that every nation was doing that as well. It seems there was a scramble for that area for some reason.
Well, that's a really great point on which to have a little break, and we'll see you in part 2 for an AMASH Bases Exopolitics UK expose. Thanks. See you then.
Gripping. Yes. Okay, the bases in Antarctica, Falklands War, and Little Blue Aliens.
This is part 2 of the AMASH Bases Exopolitics UK story about ETs and the Falklands War. David, thanks very much. Let's continue.
Okay, well now we get to the more juicy bits after getting a bit of a background to the whole situation. So essentially, after giving that little potted history of the whole Falklands War, what we actually find out is, of course, Miles mentioned before about South Georgia being the sort of spark point for the war. But actually, if you look into the history, you look back into parliamentary questions, etc., you find out that in 1976 a base was built on Thule Island, which is the one that we showed on the map that was there before. The Argentinians strangely went and built this base on Thule Island. It was supposedly a scientific base. And on the picture there you can see that doesn't give a good view. I've got some other footage of it later, but that was supposedly a weather monitoring station and other things. Strangely enough, had about between 10 and 18 staff, and there was an armed military contingent on there as well. So of course the British from 1976 started noticing this because we had a ship called HMS Endurance, which many people will have heard of. Interestingly, was about to be scrapped, and the only thing we had down there, this wasn't a warship, this was an icebreaker, and this was sending helicopters over and keeping an eye on this base and what was going on around there. So what you've got to keep in mind as we go through these next few slides, this next bit of information, is what did the Thatcher government or the military or the upper echelons of the military or the Illuminati type military that we saw in the X-Files clip beforehand, because of course we know that this thing doesn't pervade throughout the whole of the government, certainly not down into parliamentary politics. What did was it the chicken or the egg? Did the Argentinian War take place because of the reasons that we were given over land and territory, oil rights, all the other reasons we were given, or was something else going on? Because by the end of this, I think you'll see that this other issue was far larger. So they essentially start monitoring what's happening on this Thule Island. And remember, these conditions, if you can see that base is built off the ground, the conditions here, it goes down to like minus 60 degrees Celsius, I think I read. The whole Antarctic is down to that.
Is it a large island, David?
Thule Island it's a volcanic island. I've got a large shot of it in a minute. It's a volcanic island, ice sort of plateaus, but no, it's not big at all. I don't know the actual size of it. If you go and have a look, you'll see that compared to the other islands, it's one of the larger ones, like sort of triangular shaped, but certainly it's pretty small. We could find out the actual size of it, but no, not big at all. But anyway, interesting things were actually happening on this island, as we'll find out. So behind the scenes, there was some diplomatic stuff went on between the Lord Carrington, who was the sort of foreign guy, and he encouraged the Foreign Office to send a submarine down there as well. Again, interesting why before anything had broken out they send down a nuclear submarine to keep an eye on the whole process. So that's the base on Thule Island down there that the Argentinians had built. What we then find out, and you'll have to bear with me for this because I actually found this information out from a contactee regarding this blue extraterrestrial race. There's not a lot known about them, but as you will know if you look into sort of Vedic Hindu literature, you'll find the references to apparently one humanoid race is one of these 5 strands of humans that were genetically put on the earth. I think I'm right in saying this wasn't their gods, it was actually us humanoids. There were humanoids in a blue form, but you can't find constant references to these blue-skinned races. So they are there, they are in sort of our genetics or ET genetics.
Yes, I have to mention in my first trip to the States with the International UFO Congress, which was way back in 1993, I was brought into the loop about the blue ETs.
Right.
And they were diametrically opposed to the greys. They were meant to be the good guys.
Makes sense.
Insofar that there are good guys. And this was pretty well known within the UFO community in the States.
Interesting.
In that conference, that conference.
I find that interesting because you talk about blue ETs or this blue race and you don't come across it much. Someone stopped me at the end of the last conference and said that Dolores Cannon had done several cases where blue ETs were mentioned. So again, you're back to sort of America there. I don't know why you don't come across it much in the certain British literature. This guy...
That's why I thought of it.
I've come across them with some of our people that we've spoken to, and they seem to be the little, quite small,
smallish
beings.
4.5 foot, he says, 4.5 foot, and greyish-like in a way. We know greys, but certainly seem more hybrid-like in a way. Anyway, this guy actually got taken to their planet. No time to go into that, but the guy I'm on about, Alec Newald, is an engineer. He's not, he's not some sort of dippy, new agey contactee. The guy's an engineer, had no interest in this area, and went and got taken to.
He was actually taken for 10 days, I understand.
10 days, yeah, 10 days. His car taken off the road in New Zealand, and got taken to their planet. They're from a planet called Haven. Don't know if that's the actual term, their term or our term. Taken to a planet called Haven. An amazing story. Then got dropped back, and many things started to happen to him then. So he briefly mentioned this in the book and about the Falklands, and so I started this dialogue with him and got a little bit more information about it. So essentially, to summarise, we find out that these blues had a base underground. So while the Argentinians had one on top, these blues had a base underground. They'd had one there since World War I era, and this is the crucial part that you have to remember, and I would be interested, Miles, given what you said about Harwell and what was found there, because the whole reason they had to do it, remember how far this island is basically the closest you can get to Antarctica, so obviously the colder you get, to work on this nano oil substance, they had to do it in an absolutely freezing cold temperature. This stuff gets active when it starts to get warm. It stays dormant while it's under the earth, under the seabed apparently is where it be. And so as long as it's under pressure and is cold, it stays sort of dormant. They're working on this apparently to de-engineer it, because it's been put there since the start of, I presume, when we were put on the planet or a previous race. The danger is that it can be it sends out signals, it can be communicated with, and it can be engaged.
Can I just ask, just for clarification, because we're just looking at this slide here for a minute, just to really come back to the oil substance. It just says that the ET's project required their lab to be in an Antarctic climate.
Yeah.
So we're saying then that the Argentinians had a relationship with the ETs for, we suspect, a long time?
Don't know how long. Apparently, very high-ranking Argentines were well aware of this in the military. Were aware of this
because of the German involvement.
I'd love to know if it goes back that far.
Lisa Williams has sent me a number of texts about this, and she connects completely with this. And this works. This scenario works. And Lisa, whose real name we don't go into, but she's appeared at Lisa with, and she's corresponded with a number of Amash people on this German soul splicing type thing, where the Germans are trying to hop generations by soul splicing into future generations.
Right.
But she completely agrees that this makes sense with the Argentinians because of the German connection.
Can I just say, sorry, David, that the US is also aware of this mission, and given it's the UK's position with the territory, they must also be aware. So just to come back to that oil issue, how did anybody become aware that there was a substance, an oil-like substance, that was essentially like a piece of pathological aware...
it's like a sentient AI.
A sentient, thank you, that's better.
We need to, in the current climate of what we're shooting, it's the film Prometheus brings this stuff.
I played the clip from Prometheus at this, because if you go and
I haven't seen that yet, so...
A wonderful film, and yet again, just like the X-Files, and what was the other one that had Keanu Reeves in recently? It also had a black mass that then went and took over and literally went through all the biology of life.
Interesting how this is seeping into then. I mean, it's like, you know, everything in plain sight again, isn't it?
And of course the film The Blob.
The Blob, yeah, the Thing. But James Cameron, I believe, is way high up, and I think the CIA, all these people talk to these sort of people, and that film Prometheus was, if you notice, was all about black goo that then morphed into creatures, and there's certain...
Ridley Scott, arguably one of the greatest living directors, is set to release a prequel to his 1979 mega hit, Alien, Prometheus. One of the most anticipated sci-fi films in recent memory. Infowars.com research analysis shows Prometheus is not just a film, but a revelation of the method, revealing the deepest secrets of the Illuminati mystery religion. I do have a lot of contacts in the media, as viewers and listeners know, and I have been able to secure a copy of an early script, and it follows very closely from the trailer I've seen and other leaks. And I'm not going to give the entire film away here, but in synopsis, this is a film about the origins of humankind with a super race of near immortal genetic engineers who are contemplating a genetic overwrite or rewrite of the planet Earth when meddling humans stumble in to the magician's laboratory. They are punished for their trespass.
It was so wrong.
The so-called space jockey is the advanced species that have engineered humans back on Earth and produced the bioweapon that we know of as the classical alien that burst out of your chest after feeding on the food in your intestines. The reason we're taking time out to examine Prometheus is because its storyline, its plot, mirrors that of many ancient societies. And the ideas presented in Prometheus are at the core of Western secret societies.
These are ancient civilizations that were separated by centuries, and yet this same pictogram was discovered in every one of them.
Please tell me you can read that.
I think they want us to come and fight.
From ideas developed by the ruling class of this planet. And I want to be clear, every major globalist we look at, going back more than 160 years, is completely and totally obsessed with the idea that off-world aliens are controlling this planet and giving them hidden knowledge. By the 1870s, T.H. Huxley Group and their X Club was dominating the Royal Society in England. The dominant theory within the X Club was that humans had been seeded here, along with most other life forms, by advanced beings from space. From the inception of Darwin's theory on the origin of species, evolutionary scientists never believed for a minute that life simply started on its own. That evolution is not some random, slow system developing by chance, but is actually directed by off-world seeders, terraformers, creators of worlds. Even the discoverer of DNA, Francis Crick, promotes the idea that life was seeded on this planet in what he calls directed panspermia.
So back to your presentation then, David. I just wanted to find the link between when this came to anybody's attention that there was this kind of material?
I don't know, or I don't know, and I wish I knew more. All I know is that when he was taken in the 90s,
about Alex Newald.
Alex Newald was taken to this planet. They basically gave him a complete potted history of the Earth, and he didn't remember a lot of this. He came through back to him gradually. But one of the things that stuck in his head was the fact that a certain race had put this, that the Earth was formed with this as part of the geology. There were at certain places around the planet, and we found 2 or 3 of them, we think now, where this intelligent oil has been put, and it's almost like being ready to activate, and it's stayed dormant until now. And as we go on, you'll find some quite scary episodes of where we think it started to be activated. So
now,
sorry,
but we just finished interviewing in Prague a person who claims to be one of the original source intelligences on Earth. It was Emanova. But I think the problem about that is she's invited me there for 5 to 6 days alone.
Is that scary?
Well, we'll see. I'm not going.
How does that fit in with the oil?
It fits in with the oil because certain sources are suggesting that Ava and Barry King have been turned by a very dark force, and that could be, I don't know.
Well, this oil seems a bit more less esoteric than perhaps you're implying in a way. It seems to me like it's more or less like it's a gooey substance that has all these magical morphing qualities and stuff, but on the level of other things that it does, I don't quite know, and I don't want to leap into other areas because I don't know exactly how it actually functions, but we have got some evidence of it doing very strange psychological things, which we'll come to when we get to the Marconi people.
Right, okay.
Well, it's a black fluidic source that were like 10.
So we're basically looking at a black fluidic substance, like Miles says, that is oil-like in viscosity, let's say, has some kind of sentience to it
when it's awakened,
when it's triggered, and is in certain parts of the planet is speculated or known.
Yeah, and yours is a good point because did the ETs come and tell apparently this is all I know, the Americans were told about their mission. So the Americans, I think, were told that they were coming to try and de-engineer this oil because it was about to be activated.
What triggered
Admiral Byrd's mission?
I don't think that might all be linked into it because the other quote. Well, listen to this. The quote that comes back again and again and then comes off in another issue that we'll find to the Gulf of Mexico is the quote that comes back time and time again is the Russians are way ahead on this technology, and the Russians are more aware about what this technology is than... I
think that's always a ploy by the US military to say the Russians have got it. It's always the bad Russians have got it.
Well,
and
when
they're the people who've got it.
Yeah, I would go back...
That's a fall guy. I
go back to my deep looking into the Russians, how many times they've been down there, and how many times you have to go and look at photograph a penguin. They were down there building bases in the 30s, 40s, and then accelerated in the 60s, and they're way ahead on this Lake Vostok area. So
I'm really intrigued as to what event, what triggered human awareness as to having a sentient...
I think the ETs had to. I think if you imagine the way ETs work, they often work. They can't always do things by secret. They know we're now at the stage where we can detect their craft. I think what it's chemtrails is about. That's always been my issue. It's UFO detector. We have certain radars since the 40s that can detect metallic UFOs, but those that are of a more trans-dimensional nature, I think this chemtrail thing is a way of detecting these ships as they come into the atmosphere. So I think the ETs are aware of our level of technological know-how now, so they can't just come to the planet anymore like they used to back in the old days and just do things. They have to literally ask permission, and some of that's to do with the first directive, that of course you can't intervene in a developing planet in certain ways. So what you do is you ask permission on certain levels. So I think they said that to the Argentinian government they needed to work in that area, so they asked their permission. They said they perhaps didn't tell them too much. The Americans they knew were more or less global leaders, so they told them a little bit, but they basically said stay away and let us do it. This is for the good of your planet. Now the wider issues of this is, what is this stuff doing on the planet? Is it here as a terraforming agent that somehow when it activates it wipes the planet again, or was it a weapon put by another alien race, which is what they say? Don't know if they're telling the truth on that, but anyway, we'll get to a bit more of this. But the point I made at the end there on that last point was saying, well, given our alliance with the USA, if the USA did know with our basic intelligence structures, were we aware, that's the crucial point, were we aware of the technology that they were supposedly de-engineering down in this southern Thule Island, hence the Falklands War? Because if we didn't know about it, then that means the Falklands War was for the reasons that we said it right. If they did know, it seems that we wanted a taste of that technology, and hence we ended up going down to that part for that reason, which puts a whole new sheen on the Falklands War. And like Miles said, why on earth South Georgia was the declaration of war, when if you look into South Georgia, it was actually to do with some civilian businessmen going to take scrap iron off South Georgia from a whaling station, and then we used that to declare war on them. So that wasn't actually...
There's always a bigger story behind that.
Yeah, and actually... you
take my opportunity to reshot.
Okay, and essentially when you look at the start and the end of the war, bizarrely, from what we hear about the Falklands, so 1976 this base gets built on Thule, and as you'll see, the war ends with the base on Thule as well. So that's the important point. They're there de-engineering this substance. Let's make sure I've got the right point. Interestingly, on an evidential level as well, we mentioned the National Archives and then July finding about the men in little green ponchos. I spent days and days going through the National Archives on the computer, ready to order. What I was after was the treaty agreements between Britain and Argentina for the end of the Falklands War. And there's numerous of these documents. If you go and search on these, absolutely numerous. You can see the number there for each of these. There's literally numerous ones of these. One that I tried to order was so big they wanted £353 just to print it out and send it to me.
How much?
£353 to send. This is how big. So the point I'm making, some of these treaty documents. So they're all to do with logistics, what was signed, stuff. Yeah. The most interesting one I came across, I could get a copy of every Falkland Islands thing that I came across. I was allowed to order a copy of it. You can't see because I cut the slide off here accidentally. This FC 07-3537, this one you can't see it there, but it deals with the specifics of the South Sandwich Islands, between the treaty between Argentina and the UK, dealing with the South Sandwich Islands and southern Thule, basically the very area that we're talking about. When I tried to click to order this and to get more information, this is the one file that was closed for 40 years. So you can't actually get a hold of this file. Unlike
That's strange, isn't it?
All other Falklands files you can order. For the one that deals specifically...
Why the hell do they close things for so long?
Well, why do they close one file to do with a treaty, to do with the very island where this is going on, when all the other treaties... if you want to go and get the treaty on what happened on South Georgia or the main Port Stanley, you can get the treaty for it. You can get every other detail from that's all been made available.
So the supposed opening date of this is the 1st of January, then 2019.
2019, we can actually then get this document. So
if they don't close it again.
If they don't close it again, which they can sometimes do again. So they slapped a big long date on that before they'd actually let people do it. So I thought that was interesting.
It is. That's absolutely fascinating stuff.
Yeah. As I mentioned, I struggled to get hold of Argentinians, I think, due to the nature of the whole dispute, and there's still a lot of ill feeling amongst some Argentinians about the whole war, especially since the sinking of the Belgrano, which we haven't gone into, but of course, 363 Argentinian sailors were killed really for no need whatsoever. And anyway, this is Carlos, who in 1980 was a lieutenant, but a scientific officer, worked at the base that I've just shown you about on Thule, and he worked above ground. So I've been corresponding for a good year or two. Really nice guy. Told me a little bit about what was going on about the base, little bits of scientific interaction, the various experiments that are going on there. Didn't seem to me that he was too much aware about anything more major going on there, which says something in itself. What he did notice were the flights over in 1981, before the war started, to do with us sending helicopters that were observing what was going on. So there's a nice view. The base, as you can see, is in the background there, and you can see the volcanic... I mean, a beautiful area, but obviously very inhospitable.
So do you have, just going back to the sinking of the Belgrano, have you any ideas why Margaret Thatcher would order the sinking of something like that with the loss of such life when it's already way outside the 200 exclusion mile area, and also on its way from it, not to it?
No, and that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because of course there was that famous TV debate where Mrs. Thatcher agreed to go on between that and I think a peace activist, a very articulate elderly peace activist who really gave her a good going over the sinking of the Belgrano. And Mrs. Thatcher got very flustered over this, and the lady kept pushing and pushing. And for those that remember it, it really was on the front page of the news the next day. But at the end, after Thatcher got so flustered, she ended up saying, "Look, you can keep pushing me on this. I can't tell you. One day you'll find out why we had to do what we wanted to do. Why we had to do what we had to do. In other words, sink that ship that, as you rightly say, was going outside of
one day.
Yeah, well, that was the words. Someone told me this after the conference when I gave the talk, and then sent me the footage, and this indeed was what took place. She did actually say that.
That's a bizarre thing to say, isn't it? I mean, a press conference is a press conference, and the politicians are people that we put there, and they should be accountable to us.
Yeah. So to say,
what the hell's that about?
You know, you can't think of what other reason would she have to say that one day you'll find out. It's like,
okay, Mrs. Thatcher, this is your opportunity.
Yeah, I think she's
yeah,
I think we're having a comedy moment there.
Yeah,
believing in politicians, but we'll leave that out for the moment.
Okay, so Carlos on the bass. All right, quick mention. This is the book that. If you want to find out a bit more about his experiences with these blue ETs, then that's the guy that I'm sort of indebted to for starting off this whole bit of research. That's Alec Newald's 2 books called Co-Evolution, and a fascinating read it is too. So that's his website at the top, where he does a blog very occasionally as well. Okay, so what happens at the end of the war, as I say, is unknown to most people. The war started with this southern Thule when the base was built in 1976, and it actually ended, strangely enough. You didn't hear any of this in the press, nothing at all. What then happened 2 weeks after the apparent surrender, so, you know, the surrender of the main Falklands War, all the celebration, all that stuff about the flag going up over Port Stanley. Well, actually, what you'll find out is that we then gathered a series. I've got the list of ships here, and I can't name it off by heart, but I'll just play you a bit of video here. We actually sent in the Royal Marines and the SAS went in and did the underground base. So we hear.
So what do you mean they did the underground base?
So whilst you'll see this in a minute. Whilst the war finished, and we basically, it's very strange the way you think, well, we're going to now concentrate on this tiny little island that's just got this tiny little weather station base on. Well, why on earth would they need to send, and I quote from a document, Operation Keyhole. Interestingly, the whole name, the code name, the military code name for the Falklands was Operation Corporate, which again comes back to the point that the ET said this war is more about it's not so much about politics, it's about business. Isn't it interesting that the name for the Falklands was Operation Corporate? Well, isn't it also interesting that the very final, just to take over this tiny little so-called weather station, the operation given to that little escapade was called Operation Keyhole. Don't know where they get these names from. So they sent the frigate HMS Yarmouth, full-on fighting ship, ice patrol vessel HMS Endurance, a supply ship Oleander, and a rescue tug called the Salvageman, together with a squadron of Royal Marines. These were all sent to surround this tiny little island of southern Thule. And you've got to ask yourself, why send at the end of the war such a big expedition for a tiny island when they know full well there are 10, 18 soldiers on board this?
Just beggars belief, doesn't it? And begs the question.
It's strange, but if you watch this, you'll actually see what happens. So this is some very rare footage of. The base was called Corbeta, Uruguay. This was the name given to the base on there. And what you see in here is actually Royal Marines. From what we know, the SAS and the Special Boat Squadron, and I do know that they went in because I found that in a couple of books that they did send the SAS and the Special Boat Squadron to this island, but in the official records you won't find any mention of that. But it seems to me the Royal Marines went to do the main base on top, and the SAS and SBS seem to have gone in on 2 different occasions and gone and found this other alien base.
I was going to say, which makes no sense with the official story, but with your story, absolutely begins to make sense.
Didn't mention why would they send SAS in to just do a very small base. It would make it look really stupid. So none of that was mentioned. But in some books, you'll find that yes, special services were sent to do Operation Keyhole. So here is it's 2 minutes long. Here's the footage. You can get it up to. Sorry, it's got some the music underneath is just Argentinian music. This is a mixture of footage taken by people on the base, the scientists, and also some news footage. So that's the base. My guess is that this was taken by Royal Marines. So here are the Royal Marines, you know, fair few of them, and there they are on the base that you've seen pictures of. And the base was taken without a shot being fired, so
there's nothing there.
Oh, yeah, nothing. You know.
Oh, is it me? Am I missing something?
Well, exactly. That's the point. That was the treaty being signed for this thing. Look at the extent of explosives they use on this little base. Wait a minute. I mean,
I wonder if this is a Phil Schneider event.
Could well be.
And for those of you who wonder,
here.
Oh
look,
wow!
Look.
Oh my god!
I mean, that's some C5 explosives, and this is what's left of the base after. You know.
I mean, sorry.
Do you think they were making a statement? I don't know. I'm still confused about why they had to do that. If that was a science base, you know, there was something going on there with that. So, yep. Anyway, let's find our way back to there.
Well, how strange is that? I mean, you know, I think this is really interesting, David, because I really had no idea, never thought about anything like this before, but wow, this...
Well, none of this got into our head, you know, it wouldn't do. It's a tiny little island. It would have made us look rather foolish after this gallant war that we fought, and then suddenly that we went and blew this supposed tiny science base upon this remote island. You know, it was just bizarre. So, anyway, well, this serves as a distraction, but there's how they left the... Interestingly, some Argentinians snuck back and put the flag back up. After the British flag went up, they went and put the Argentinian flag back up. So I think there was another revisit to then blow the rest of it up. I think some other task force went and did that again. I thought that was quite amusing in its way.
It's unbelievable.
Okay, so essentially now we find that this oil substance, apparently when they raided the base, the special services found a certain amount of technology that got taken, God, whatever that was, all the usual stuff that they probably find when advanced intelligences are operating on this planet. They also found samples of this black oil nanosubstance. Then, through a series of events, we find that it gets back to a certain company called Marconi. Now, when I gave this talk, someone said, "How do you know that this got back there?" Well, there are several reasons, which we'll find as we go along. One of which was that Alec Newald, the contactee who knew these Blue ET group, because of his story and because he got put in jail once for on a series of things that related to his car coming back with some very strange adaptations to it that got traced back to Jaguar in Britain, and Jaguar in Britain sent the RIA, Royal Institute of Affairs, RIAA, very famous Chatham House.
Yes, yeah.
Right, apparently top ranking people as far as the ET issue, and I've got a picture that's not included here of RIA, Chatham House people, Thatcher, Reagan, everyone together. So this is the upper ranking of people that deal with world affairs and
so they were sent to interview Alec
they were sent to Alec Newald. Turned up at his door and said, "Why has your car got an advanced fuel system that mirrors it has gone backwards?" You see, he'd been taken to a parallel universe and his car had been taken there on this ship, and his car came back. The idea was that as he went back and got put back on his planet into this other dimension, it all goes with their universe is in parallel to ours. This is the idea that he's been told. So they traced him from this. His car went in for servicing, and the next thing he knew, a few weeks later, then they'd obviously sent it back to Jaguar, and Jaguar had informed someone that this very weird circuit board inside his engine management system was unlike anything they've seen. So that's another side story. So got in touch. He was then got in touch while he was in jail over this, refusing to pass information on to them about his ET contacts. He got jailed for that and other.
Oh, that's
reasons.
right, isn't it? Because he refused to answer their questions about his ET events.
There are many things they were saying. We want to know what's happened with this. There was something to do with another crash. They wanted to identify some aspects of it. He refused to do it. He wouldn't cooperate at all, and he was put into a jail in New Zealand for quite some time, actually. And anyway, at that point, he then meets a guy, gets in touch with him from South African intelligence, who we know that the South African intelligence are very much linked to the British, also far more involved on world affairs than I think many people realise. A very efficient, if you look at the history of South Africa, a very efficient intelligence organisation. And he basically says that the British that struck gold down in the Falklands, that this stuff was taken.
This is the South African intelligence guy.
Told him. Yeah, said that this thing was taken to Marconi. But you don't even need to know that, because then if you then trace what happens after, then a lot of things start to make sense. So
what sort of year are we in here?
Yeah, so I was just making some points there, basically linking them. You know, Marconi at the time were way ahead. They're a British company under a General Electric. I got it wrong in a talk I gave. I thought General GE were an American company, but apparently GEC are a British company. The General Electric company were our umbrella company, so the whole thing is a British-owned company, along with Plessey, who you'll see next, based in Chelmsford in the UK. They've been around, obviously they were around since the days of the wireless. Miles will know more about that than you know. Since the days of the wireless, they were given the patent and instructions about how to manufacture the first wireless sets, etc. I'm showing these because you'll find that in these
I think, just butting in there, the Marconi thing, Marconi was allegedly brought in by the Germans to deal with crashed retrievals in Germany in the 1930s.
Wow.
He was also...
It was definitely something to do with it, I know that much.
He was then doing certain broadcasts from Ireland, which a close associate of mine is claimed to have been involved with. And so the Marconi transmissions from Ireland were integral to whatever some people are beginning to sort out, that there's some strange black fluidic intelligence in broadcasting.
Right.
Now, certain radio amateurs are beginning to wake up to this, that there's some difference between why we stopped Tesla type broadcasts and adopted the Marconi system of broadcasting.
We're told that was a war over other things, aren't we?
Yes, but it's crucial that this has affected humanity's... People are beginning to notice that there's something has happened to humanity since the start of broadcasting.
Right.
And what we encountered directly in pirate radio transmissions in Ireland was some kind of black fluidic energy.
Right. I don't know.
The key to this is Marconi.
Well, it is Marconi. I just don't know how far it's filtered into to different areas. There's a quote a bit later on that says that they got some amazing inventions from this fluid, but it also caused significant problems.
The key to this is energy, intelligent energy.
Yes, I think that's what you're getting to, isn't it? It's sentient.
And therefore, anything involving intelligence, anything involving human communication and thought through a medium of whatever you want to call it, this energy can piggyback on.
Well, it's claimed, the only claim, there is some scientific research on this substance, and it's called Augie, A-U-G-I-E, and it's similar to gold. It's got some gold structure, and apparently it can morph into anything within its chemical makeup. Now, I don't know what that is. I don't know what its chemical formula is. All I know is that AU is linked to gold, and apparently they've found out that that is the case. I don't know much more than that, but it is sentient, and it does seem to be able to morph into certain things and have a life of its own, which is where the danger. It also can interface with obviously computers, which is where we come to the next bit. Plessey was another company that you'll find involved in these. The next pattern that I'm about to show you. Plessey, another high-tech company, and the interesting part. You've got to remember the dates for this. The dates are really important, because when these Marconi deaths that I'm talking about came about, no one really realised why all of a sudden did these sort of things start happening.
We haven't actually mentioned that just to this point, David, just as you said that. So we're talking about how Marconi was the recipient for research, I assume, of this black sentient material, along with Plessey. And from that, then down, I don't know when the years are, you'll tell us, there were many numbers of deaths of scientists there, and that's what you're just talking about.
Yeah, and if you look at the links, basically, if you imagine, I mean, my take that I was talking about with Grant Cameron before is that America's got a whole, since 1947, the national security state, America's got a whole infrastructure based on its readiness to accept alien artifacts and alien knowledge, and even ETs themselves. They've just got that built in. They've got the infrastructure, they've got the power, they've got the finance to do it. I think Britain in the early 80s wasn't ready for what was about to happen to them, and they tried to keep some of this for themselves. They found it in what they counted as their war, and they tried to deal with it to get a technological advantage, and it bounced back on them. And you'll see in a minute. What's interesting, I found, is that GC Marconi became its most powerful and turned into one of the major defence and satellite communication companies when they merged with Plessey, but this advantage came and they merged in 1986. So that's just a guess of mine, but just realise if this magical nanofluid came back in 1982, it's imagining this whole year of the 80s as some sort of year where a lot of things started happening underneath the...
Well, the crucial thing about this is, and I was involved with this, is that Marconi, Plessey and ITT were involved with the first generation of digital telephone exchanges. And Plessey and GEC were crucial in taking that over.
This guy who wrote... You're right there. This guy who wrote this book got constantly diverted off when he tried to ask the military about what was going on with Marconi and what we're about to discuss next.
And that book, is called Open Verdict by Tony Collins.
Tony Collins wrote this book, published in 1991. Basically, he was editor of Computer Weekly, and he kept getting certain deaths from people in Marconi turn up on his desk because he was editor of Computer Weekly, and he was amazed that no other newspaper was actually reacting to this.
I think Flying Saucer Review twigged on this.
Probably as well, but he was the one that went and did all this stuff. But anyway, the point you just made, he kept getting pushed to this thing called Operation Ptarmigan, and it's based on the name of a bird, but that was all to do with what you said, that the British were way ahead in what was then mobile communications. So it was all about having... It's about having a mobile phone inside a tank that was encrypted, so you carried your own mobile system with you that couldn't be encrypted. So something to do with communications he kept getting linked to there. So you're right with what you were saying about DEC.
Siemens, of course, have now taken over all communications for broadcasting.
Siemens have taken over a lot of the stuff that was found by Marconi.
The modulation of light and the way that all signals are transmitted.
I don't know about that.
Light-biased systems.
Right.
Well, is that Siemens as well?
Yeah.
I knew Siemens had got the technology that Marconi had revolutionised. Okay, so I just made the point about the merger. It was quite interesting. The two most powerful electronics companies in Britain at the time, and certainly even worldwide, then merged and became this conglomerate. Anyway. Okay, so we're on to the points here that then sort of follows on from all this. So you have this bizarre substance that comes from the booty of war. And there's British papers covered this, and all these deaths started happening in the IT sector, defence sector, etc.
So if I can just read out some of those headlines from the Los Angeles Times, it says, their firm linked to Star Wars, British scientists' deaths, suicides or conspiracy. And ComputerWeekly.com, mysterious deaths, freedom of information, Marconi and the Ministry of Defence, and the Chicago Tribune News says scientists' deaths mystify the British.
Yeah. And there was, I could have got loads more British cuttings for that, but they're very hard to. Obviously, this was the 80s; they were quite difficult to find on the internet. But this did obviously enter the British papers, and no one made the links really until a little bit later on. It took a bit of time because, of course, the MOD kept putting out, this is defence industry. Everyone gets stressed. This is what happens. But someone worked out the amount of deaths compared to every other defence industry in other areas, and it was huge. But we'll get on to
just on that point. You can ask the MOD lots of questions, but if you ask the Department of Trade and Industry the same questions, you will not get any answers.
You'll get less from the detail.
You will certainly not get answers in a very blunt form.
Right.
That's where the business is done.
I could have tried the DTI for actually some of this. That would have been quite interesting. Anyway, the patterns here, I think, are absolutely phenomenal, and it's a shame about these slides. I mean, I'll give Miles another copy of these images, but I'll put these out now that you can see. So essentially, you know, you start counting these deaths. I mean, there's one there in 1982, so there's a bit of leeway, but essentially, if you look at the patterns of these deaths that took place, these were all people working on Marconi. I mean, you can see there's people, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony McCoy, defence experts, at the Royal College of Military Science. A lot of these are hard to read. I could read them off here, but there's not really enough time to go through them. Obviously, down the side, you'll see their method of death, or sorry, suicide, which is what they're always called. This is why the book's called Open Verdict, because believe me, every police force seemed to bow down and make everything a suicide, even though they were absolutely bizarre.
There's one there. I just have to look at that one. It's called decapitation.
That was the one I was going to mention. Poor guy. That's
26-year-old.
A 26-year-old, very young programmer. Well, if you want to think about how would a young 24-year-old programmer, quite optimistic in his life, was I think he was about to get married at that point.
He cut off his own head. How do you do that?
Well, how do you do that? His method of death, apparently, his method of death. I can read it out in full from here. He essentially, allegedly, tied one rope round his neck. He then also tied the other end of a rope to a tree, I think it was, or a lamppost. Obviously, he did a nice tight knot, got into his car, wound down the window with it still attached, and then pressed his accelerator to the floor, picked up speed, and pulled his head off.
Well, a nice way to go.
Yeah, a nice way to go, and just a very strange, strange way of all these suicides, when there are many other ways to actually kill yourself with far less pain and far less trauma. Decapitation, suffocation, asphyxiation. I mean, when you go into some of these, they are bizarre. A family man found by son and daughters who'd gone into his garden shed and had put electric wires over himself and electrocuted himself. Just numerous ones. Guy jumped off, another guy, one of these other young Asian programmers, jumped off the Bristol suspension bridge, and when they found the body, it had a puncture mark in one of his buttocks. This goes on and on. But the point, anyway, you can go and look these up for yourself. The lists are on the internet. The point I want to make, given the issue we said about the Falklands, are the dates here. So we have March 82, April 83, March 1985, yeah,
November 85, August 86. Gosh, they're all like almost within 6 months of each other.
Notice how they build up for the 86s. So August 86, October 86, January 87. January 87. So we have this crescendo of them starting to build up, and it's not finished yet. We go on again. Do you want to read the other one out? The February 87 is that?
Yeah, and 3 in February 87.
Yeah.
And we've got March 87, April, 3 in April, 1 in May, 1 in June. This is
87.
And they all work. Are they all in the same department? Are they all what?
These are all linked to, but they're either on lease sort of from the MOD to Marconi, but they all are linked to Marconi projects, and they all work in certain
communications. I'm trying to see what they were doing. Just 1 or 2.
I can tell you roughly what but we've not finished yet.
Okay.
So we're not finished yet. So we come on to the third page, and
so I got January 98, March 1988.
Sorry, 88.
I meant 88. Yeah, and March 88, August 88. August 88 and September 88. Good Lord.
Okay, so that's 22. I mean, someone counted 25, I think, but these are the main ones that.
So asphyxiation seems to be quite a popular one, and so does electrocution. Those are favourites.
Electrocution, asphyxiation. What were a few of those ones?
Death leap. I've seen 1 or 2 different.
Here's another one that comes to mind. An auto accident where a totally married guy, totally happy, happened to drive into a wall at 70 miles an hour, and silly old him, he'd got 6 canisters of gas in his boot, and of course they blew up. Don't know why a computer engineer, I forgot what his actual work was, would need 6 canisters of propane in his boot, but of course I think he escaped from that, but then
they got him afterwards.
Yeah, he went again then. Anyway, now what's interesting about all these is the as I say, the dates, because these then basically stop. So you've got this sort of life of what I think is a project that's going on.
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the other thing that I noticed is that you have at the start. I went and researched some of the early people to die, and they both brought in a expert from Essex University, one of the foremost early computer programmers, had basically learned how to create hospital records before anyone else. Professor at Essex University, he was one of the first to be brought into the project. Also, this army guy from the science college, 49, he was brought in, and it made sense to me. If you're a project, you're a military guy, you're setting up a project, you bring in two senior people, especially a computer programmer. You say, right, we've got this stuff. You know, we need to what to do it. You then employ the junior programmers. You have to bring in people that know a lot about new stuff like computers. So we have then the deaths of these two. Got the whole details of their death in this death dossier here, which is quite long. I've got the details of the two Asian guys' deaths, and they're both extremely happy guys, and they were experts in Fortran, a programming language. They also both seem to be dealing in the realm of computer simulations. Others were experts in satellite communications. There was a sort of remit that certain of them were part of, mostly to do with computers and simulations. This seems to be a big part of the project. But so part of my analysis, having done that and read Tony Collins's book, is that they essentially...
Can I just read one thing before you go on? The suffocation one, the penultimate one. It says, Richard Pugh, computer consultant for the Ministry of Defence, he was found dead, wrapped head to toe in rope that was tied 4 times around his neck, and the coroner listed his death as an accident to a sexual experiment gone awry.
Believe me, it's like
rope all around your body, and
like you say, it's like a Phil. It's like a Phil Schneider. It's like a Phil Schneider. The bizarre thing comes to when these things go to inquest, because obviously at certain points you can't control everyone. So certain coroners are going, no, this is bizarre. The two Asian guys who ended up killing themselves ended up going all the way to Bristol. Now, during this time in Bristol, no one could account for 2 days of where they were, and 2, 3 or 4 of these people had missing time events. So some of the conclusion that you could probably come to is that maybe these weren't, they were so bizarre, maybe these weren't physically our security services killing these people, but it seems to me, and there was suggestions with another person that came forward called Joe Vialis, who also got, have you heard of him, Miles? He was a very famous conspiracy researcher, did a lot of stuff.
I haven't heard of him.
Joe Vials, I think I pronounced his name wrongly. Anyway, he was working in the oil industry, but knew a bit and was commenting a bit about these cases. He's also dead, of course. But it seems, given that there was lots of missing time, that and these people did bizarre things, like, you know, they disappeared for a few days before, and they were, you know, their behaviour would change overnight. People that one of these guys, his dad was dying, and his dad was American, and he'd bequeathed him $60,000, and he just went missing, didn't turn up. So he had everything to live for, didn't turn up, went missing, still missing to this day. But all this stuff with missing time hints at the fact that I think that it wasn't necessarily that these were being all carried out by, some of them were, by intelligence, our intelligence agents or whoever, that some of this may have been some remote influencing technology of some sort that basically programmed these people to go and kill themselves. Now, the scenario that I think came around is that when Marconi received these things, because, like I said, they didn't have this infrastructure like the Americans had for dealing with these things. If you saw Dan Sherman talk at the last Exports event, he was only part of quite a small ET communication thing that he had to do through a computer using his mind. But he went through the whole system of how they have these grey projects that are then surrounded by black projects to stop people getting in.
I remember reading about that.
Absolutely amazing the way that they said it came to the mid to late 70s, and the UFO public has started to guess how they were operating, had could get too far into these projects, so they devised, it wasn't before that, he claimed it was in the mid to late 70s, this onion thing. Sounds very obvious, but the complexity of which, of hiding these grey projects.
Like the Russian doll thing,
yeah, Russian doll thing.
Yeah.
So you have your alien project surrounded by a black project, and then you have a normal project around that. Well, I don't think the British had this sort of stuff. I think they were good at it because we, in the war we taught the Americans a lot and stuff. I think we didn't know what was happening, and we didn't know how to deal with this stuff when it turned up. And so what happened was you had to then pull people in from that weren't normally conditioned to the military way of doing things. So you grabbed people from Essex University. You went and got programmers from abroad in India. And
well, also at that time we're not as far down, as we are now in 2012 for programming and all the rest of that.
Nowhere near.
It was an entirely different era. It's like a different age, wasn't it?
And if they got a hint, say if the SS had raided this base and they'd seen that these samples of oil were perhaps rigged up to some sort of fibre optics, whatever they used, whatever the ETs had used, they must have got an idea somehow that this stuff could be interfaced with. They knew enough about it. I don't think they knew entirely what they had on their hands, but they knew enough about it that it could be interfaced with. So they bring in these computer programmers. I think as part of this, two problems happened. A, they had to read at that stage they had to, as the military say, they had to read them into the project, but at a level that they wouldn't normally do. In other words, they had to sort of say, well, look, where's this has come from? Had to brief them and basically say that this stuff has come off planet. Now, to a very conservative young computer programmer, that could be quite unnerving, to a degree. I think on top of that, what seems to have happened, as we'll see from a quote in a minute, is one of these scientists found out that this stuff could be switched on in a certain way, and also certain things seem to start happening, that they had these nanobots made up. When I suppose when you look at them under a microscope, or when this stuff starts to morph and operate, then things start moving, and things start getting a little bit scary.
So are we saying, David, then that this oil, whatever, the sentient stuff, is off planet? Or is it within the Earth? Is it sort of a natural functioning of the Earth's, evolution that's just reached a certain stage and now it's being triggered into a new level of development? It seems to either have been. This is all conjecture. I think it was put here by whoever made this planet and put us on it as a safety device for if we fucked up, and if we screwed up as a race and created all hell, then this stuff would rewrite the planet. If you watch the Prometheus film, that's essentially what was going to go on. This stuff would genetically rewire and rewrite the planet in a terraforming way. So
now you were talking about other areas on the Earth where this stuff seems to be active.
Yep.
We've got about 10 minutes left, or 5 minutes left on this part. So if you wanted to go over that section.
Okay, well let's finish off the suicide, and then we'll go through because that gets actually quite interesting. So while I was talking to Alec Newald, he mentioned the South African guy was working. The South African intelligence agency worked and educated with a guy called Victor Moore. Lo and behold, who do I find in here? The Book of the Dead Scientist, but Victor Moore. So again, another working as a design engineer for Marconi Space Systems, found dead of an overdose. Now his wife claims she thinks it was a suicide, but something about his work had made him very uneasy, and she saw a total change in him overnight.
Really?
So there's one that probably was a suicide, but it's again a guy that was happy in his work up till then, but was asked to then join a new project. All this jigsaw fits together. Here's the other quote. Mr. X is the guy, the South African intelligence agent. He's now dead. He was quite an elderly guy, but had worked on a lot of these projects. Also been to Antarctica. Do you want to read? I can't see from this angle. Do you want to read these quotes?
So he's just saying the British struck gold in the early 1980s, and it says, my contact in South Africa even knew one of the Marconi guys, as he had studied in the UK with him years before, in brackets Victor Moore. He was the one that noticed when the oil was switched on, they started to get interference with their weather satellites. How interesting is that?
That's crucial. That bit's crucial.
Very so, and that's from Alec Newald,
Yeah.
Personal Communication 2011. This friend let slip one day about a new robotic fluid their computer and engineer guys were working with that could be programmed with radio frequencies. There you go, Miles, that's wild, isn't it? They thought they might be able to use it hydraulically, which would open up all kinds of new design fields. When he asked around, nobody knew who invented it or where it might have come from, nor even any talk of patents to buy from another company.
Yeah.
Coevolution, that's Alec Newald again, 2010.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, David. I mean, my God.
Yeah. So
Wow.
again,
That's startling
Well,
stuff,
it's not
isn't
a
it?
hydraulic fluid, it's an intelligent blood.
I disagree. When Alec
it in animating
Newald, one of his hints to me was to say, go and look. You'll find that Marconi probably opened a new hydraulics division around about that time. And I disagreed with that because I think this. I don't think this. As you say, I don't think this fluid is hydraulic in the way that we think it's we don't just because
Yes,
it's
we
an oil.
may
It's not.
think it-
No,
I
hydraulic
think it's.
is a crude
I
substance.
think you're
It's
dead
an
right.
intelligent
Yeah.
nanofluid which takes over, reanimates things.
Yeah, whatever it is, we don't put it into gadgets to make them lubricate and do things and do what
No,
hydraulics do.
no.
So I think he was thinking along different lines to that. So I totally agree, and I thought that at the time he told me that. Open verdict. Is there anything else I wanted to? Yeah, I was going to make a point that Tony Collins came to the conclusion in his book that these deaths, obviously he looked into it in depth, these deaths were basically all to do with either stress or mostly he put them down to Cold War spy killings, or they were just inconclusive. Again, it was the 80s again, he was researching this in the 80s, the Cold War, as we just discussed, was still raging at that point.
Well, that's a brilliant point to end this section on, and we'll have a smoke break.
David, it's getting more and more interesting. I can't wait for part 3.
You wait.
Okay, thanks folks. We'll see you in part 3 of the AMASH, the bases and the Exopolitics UK expose on ET in the Falklands.